Hi, my name's Angela Casey and welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors, the podcast that explores Edinburgh's green spaces and the people in them. It's a slightly grey day, but it's still nice and it's getting warmer. I'm back in the old town and I'm in Lady Stairs Close, which is between the Mound, which goes down towards the new town, and the Lawn Market, which is part of the Royal Mile. And it's a place where people still live, very tall Edinburgh old town tenements, and it's also the site of a very beautiful building, which is the Writers' Museum, which is worth looking at the outside even if not the inside. And we're going to talk about writers today. And I'm very pleased to welcome to Edinburgh Outdoors today Ruth Boreham.
Hi.
So welcome.
Thank you so much.
It's very nice to have you here. And it's very nice to have you on the podcast. So we've already been talking about the Writers' Museum.
Yes.
Which you are telling me was built as a house. It's a nice building, isn't it?
It's beautiful. I love the outside of it in particular. It's almost like someone has designed what you would want of a historical building. It's got a turret on it. It's got a balcony, so you can kind of imagine Rapunzel or Juliet or something like that, kind of going, Romeo! It was built as a house in the 1620s, was lived in right up until the end of the 19th century, and then it was gifted to Edinburgh Council in 1907. And there's been a museum since the 1914 period. And nowadays is very much the Writers' Museum.
I love the entrance to there because it just looks really unassuming.
I love it. I love also the fact that it's got the marriage lintel above the front door.
Oh, is that what it is?
So the initials of the gentleman, William Gray, who had it built in 1622, so got the date on it as well. And it was for his wife, Gida. They married in 1620. And quite often what you did was you would build a house, because obviously you're rich and you're showing off, and you would put a marriage lintel on to tell people who you are, when you moved in, and also a kind of a religious saying to prove that you're godly, that you're the right sort.
So it's built as a house?
Yes.
It's a quirky house, isn't it?
It is. There are two things inside that I love. The first is that first staircase that you can see when the front door is open, because it goes round almost the opposite way you think it should do, and that's a defensive thing. Because most people are right-handed and always have been. And so if you're trying to attack it and you're going in through the front door, you want to attack with your right hand, but the staircase is making you go around the wrong way. Whereas when you're inside and you're defending yourself, you can lead with your strong arm. And then further inside the house, there's another staircase that has what's called a trip stair in it. So it's a step that's bigger than all of the others, which if you live there, you know. It's a bit like if you have a creaky stairs or, a bit of wooden board that isn't quite right. You know about it, so you're fine. But if you're creeping in late at night to try and burgle the place, you don't know. You can't see because it's dark, and therefore you trip on it. You make a huge noise, and you're discovered and arrested. Nowadays, health and safety, of course, they're painted it white, so you can see which one it is.
You can see where it is, so it's still got a weird stare.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love stuff like that because it kind of makes you think about the thought that was going on when people were building these houses all these centuries ago and how they lived in it.
It is a lovely building, actually.
It is. This is why I like talking about women writers outside, because inside you will only find 3 male writers, as if only 3 have done any writing ever.
We're watching a run of tourists walking through Lady Stairs Close, probably going up to the castle.
I think she's going to go through to James Court, the next court along.
What's in James Court? I've never been in there.
James Court is where David Hume lived for a while, and Adam Smith popped in for tea every now and then. It's a court much like this, but it was a court that was built in the 18th century. Some of the buildings are a lot grander, and it's also where a lot of the university buildings now are.
So, Ruth, you are a researcher and a historian and all sorts of things. Can you tell me a little bit about what you do? Because you do lots of different things, don't you?
I do, yes. Monday to Thursday, you will find me working for Scottish Book Trust. I work on their Book Bug programme, which is their early years programme, which as soon as I say that, I can immediately tell if I'm talking to a parent or not, because they suddenly smile and go, oh yes, we know about Book Bug. And I love doing it. It's brilliant. But there's also a huge part of me that's about history. Cut me in half and like a bit of rock, you'll just see history all the way through. I used to work for Makar tours, which was a lot of fun, and then life changed and I went freelance. But during the pandemic, I suddenly realised that the thing that was missing the most in my life was talking about women's history. The older I get, the more interested in it I am, And I think also, as a woman myself, the older I get, the more I realise the frustrations that we sometimes struggle with in society have been around for a very long time, and that there are so many women that did so many incredible things that are just not talked about at all. Even today, some of the women that are doing incredible stuff nowadays are not being talked about. No. So I thought to myself, well, I wonder if there's maybe a little niche there that I could fill, and it turns out there is.
I think there is, because when you think about Edinburgh and the history and the famous people of Edinburgh through the ages, there are very few that we think of.
Yeah.
Because they're the ones that they're just not talked about.
Absolutely. I mean, it's said in Edinburgh that there are more statues to animals than there are to women, which, you know, nothing against animals. They are very good, but I'd quite like a few women. Well, actually, I'm not a fan of statues at all, but I would like there to be more recognition of the women that have been here.
Yeah. Why don't you like statues?
Because it puts one person up on a pedestal.
Right.
And invariably you only know the name of that person but not the context around them, and it makes them seem other. Whereas the two that I really like, one I've seen in person down in London in Parliament Square, they've got an amazing statue to Millicent Fawcett, who is part of the National Union Suffrage Society. Is an amazing woman, but what I love about that is it's not that high, but also it has photographs of lots of other women around it on the stand. So it's not saying that she was the only one who did anything, it was saying that she was part of this movement. And while we recognise her, we also recognise lots of others, and I think that is a brilliant thing to do, because no one works in isolation. And the other one, which I've only seen photos of, but I really want to go and see, is down in Dorset to Mary Anning, the fossil hunter. And actually she's on the ground, so she is walking on the ground. And the way it's being designed is that her cloak has lots of things to indicate what she was interested in. So you get a much greater sense of who she was. And because it's on the same level as you, it feels like you and she are the same. It's not saying that someone was better than you are, which is quite often what happens when someone is put on a pedestal. You have to crick your neck up to look at them, and it's that kind of therefore they are much better than you because they are up there kind
particularly
of thing.
The Dundas guy in St Andrew's Square.
Yes, I think it's only since the protests from 2020 onwards that people have suddenly gone, that's who it is.
Nobody knew
because
who
he
it
is
was.
so tall.
Yeah.
That you don't really see the statue, you just see the very, very, very tall plinth.
Well, in the moment
on.
you see Paddington.
Yes, but again, an animal.
So you do tours. One of the jobs that you do. So during the week you're doing the book bug at the Scottish Book Trust, which is fantastic, and you also do research.
Yes,
and
I've done a lot of work in the past for a TV series called Who Do You Think You Are? And off the back of that, I've been able to do some family history for people and things like that, which is such good fun.
I always think with that programme there must be so much research goes on, and there must be a lot of research that takes them down a dead end.
Yes. We would do on average 3 months worth of research before they decide if it's going to be made into a programme or not, because they have to look at the series as a whole, because you don't want 10 programmes that are all about the same topic. You also want to make sure you've got the sources, because it's a television programme at the end of the day. So if you don't have visual things to see, then it's not much use as a TV programme. And you do go down a lot of rabbit holes, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's also, what's really interesting is the things that the celebrity themselves wants to know about. And sometimes they have really firm ideas of what their history is like. For example, I worked on the Alistair McGowan programme.
Yeah.
He was convinced that he was Scottish, that McGowan was Scottish. And he talks about at the beginning how, when he's watching sports and England are playing Scotland, he's always a bit conflicted. Who should he support? And I spent so much time trying to find this Scottish connection. Turns out Irish. So you can spend an awful lot of time and not end up with anything. Or sometimes you find a whole load of stuff that you just immediately know this is going to be in TV.
Yeah.
The first one that I really worked on was Jeremy Paxman, way back in series 2. And I don't like to brag, but it was my research that made him cry. Just saying.
Marvellous.
I still remember the phone call from the director when they were filming it saying, "We've had tears," because it was the first time a celebrity had cried.
Yeah.
And the fact that it was Paxman as well was incredible. But it was the depth of poverty in parts of Glasgow that are still steeped in poverty and deprivation, and life is incredibly hard even now. And I think it was that contrast of things being really hard for his ancestors, things not really improving for the people in that area at all. That's what I love about research, any kind of research, doing the research for the tours as well. You just never know what you're going to discover.
So tell me about the tours that you currently run in Edinburgh.
I have a number of different ones. Sometimes they are concentrated on a particular area. And actually, one of the most popular ones that I'm running at the moment is the New Town. We start at St Andrew's Square, and then we wind our way down to Princes Street, and then along back into the New Town, George Street, and the like, and finish in Charlotte Square. And I think it's the most popular one because so few tours do the New Town. There are so many options when you come to the Old Town.
There's such a big tourist focus on the Old Town, isn't it?
And it is an amazing place to focus on, absolutely. And it's not to do away with any of that. I do many tours in the Old Town myself. But I think sometimes we forget how amazing the New Town is. So even though we talk about it as the New Town, it's really old and it has incredible history. And there have been some amazing people that have either lived there or worked there or influenced it in lots of different ways. And there's still so much to discover. The other week I was doing a tour and someone spotted a plaque, which I hadn't noticed because it's very faded. And it's where Shelley came to on his honeymoon in his first marriage. So when he eloped with Harriet and they got married in the Borders, they came up here for a honeymoon and they stayed on George Street. And there's so much to this city that you walk past with your mind on where you're going to or what appointment you have or what you're going to cook for dinner, or this is a shortcut, that you don't always take that time to stop and look. So one of the things I love about the tours is that it's making me see the city in a completely different way as well. And I do have a lot of locals come on my tours actually for that very reason.
Yeah.
They want to hear a different history of the place that they live in, and they want that chance to see things that they might not have seen. The longest tour that I do is from the castle to the palace. 3 hours winding your way down. Note how I started at the very top. So the tour goes down the
right
way.
direction
Exactly.
to go,
You get exhausted heading up the way, but then you've got a nice slow walk down. And then I do one that's looking just at the Cannon Gate, because again, that's a part of the Royal Mile that isn't really looked at that much. It was separate from Edinburgh for so many centuries as well.
I loved it when I was talking to Hetty in Dunbar's Close. Basically, she said that the Cannon Gate was a suburb.
Yes, absolutely.
And the gardens were bigger and the houses were bigger. Just as we now think of a suburb being probably a few miles out of the city.
Yes.
It was just the other side of the wall.
And you would sometimes have people who would have a house in Cannon Gate but also a flat in the city. So that when the city was protected on 3 sides by the wall and then the Nor Loch, if you needed protection, you needed to be in the city. Yeah, for people who only want an hour's tour, I call it the Heart of Midlothian, or the Heart of the City, and it starts at John Knox House and finishes at St Giles. And that one looks particularly at what some of the work that women were doing, so medicines and banker as well, and running a tavern, and the luckin booths and the shopkeepers and all of that kind of thing. And it's so interesting, some of the conversations that you end up having on any of these tours actually, because you are showing them what life used to be like and telling them about people who used to live here, but quite often there are the same struggles or the same issues today that are still impacting women. And on 2 of the tours I talk, for example, about sex workers. I talk about Mary McKinnon, who ran a tavern on South Bridge. One night in 1823, a man there was stabbed and he claimed on his deathbed that it was Mary who had stabbed him. She denied it, she was put on trial, she was found guilty, she was hanged.
So Lady Stairs Close holds the Writers' Museum, and they set it here because they got the building from the council.
The council owned the building and run the museum. In 1907, the council were gifted the building.
Yeah. But it is interesting, they've just made it about they've made it about
Robert Louis Stevenson,
Sir Walter Scott, and
Robert Burns.
And Robert Burns. The big boys.
Indeed, and who only really cover a century as well. So it's very kind of focused on late 18th and 19th century and 3 male writers. They do occasionally do exhibitions as well, but the permanent collections are all around there. It is worth looking at. It is amazing. They have some of the furniture, for example, that Walter Scott had and things like that. So you get a real sense of who they are. It's just frustrating when you know that there are also quite a few women who wrote as well, even in that time period. And even those who knew Robert Burns, Robert Louis Stevenson and Walter Scott all were related to them. One of my favourite women that I talk about on the Newtown tour, I stop outside the Lighthouse Board office on the Newtown because she was part of the Stevenson family. Her father was a cousin of Robert Louis Stevenson. She sold far more books during her lifetime than Robert Louis Stevenson ever did. And yet nowadays, who's the one that's remembered? It's him. But Dorothy Emily Stevenson, or D.E. Stevenson as she was published, had over 7 million books sold during her lifetime. She wrote 40 books.
And actually now, even if you look her up, you can't find that many of them.
No, definitely not. Persephone Books, who I love, they do a lot of work republishing forgotten works by women writers, and they've republished a couple of hers, which is brilliant. But yeah, the vast majority. And she was a very Scottish writer in many ways, even though her books were set in England, which she never visited. She grew up in Edinburgh. She lived most of her married life in Moffat.
Yeah. So what's this cross in the corner?
The cross is commemorating a lot of the great war poets. And of course, Edinburgh's got fantastic connections with many of them. If you think about Owen and Sassoon, who both came here for treatment, shell shock.
So I think you said that there was another writer who had lived in this close, is that right?
Yes, Lady Stairs Close is where the brilliant writer Susan Ferrier was born back in 1784. They lived there for a little time, and then the family got a bit too big and they moved to George Street, which I always think about because George Street was fairly new at that point as well, and that contrast of living in a very squashed close on the old town and then moving to George Street and having a lot more space.
It was a bit like somebody moving into a new build.
Yes,
as
absolutely.
Susan Ferrier, I think, was also another writer who at the time was as popular as the male writers, wasn't she? But hardly anyone reads her books now.
She was more popular than Jane Austen. It's not just the male writers as well. She's sometimes called the Scottish Jane Austen. They were writing at similar times, writing about similar things. They were both unmarried. They both published anonymously to begin with. And actually one of Susan's books starts with, "It is a truth universally acknowledged," which she definitely nicked from Pride and Prejudice. So,
do you think she was taking the mickey a bit?
I think a bit, yeah, definitely. So you can understand why she's sometimes called the Scottish Jane Austen. Her books were hugely successful though. Her first book was published and she got £150 for it. It's called Marriage. Her second book was published just over 200 years ago actually. Last year was the 200th anniversary of its publication. It's called The Inheritance. And she received £1,000 for it.
How much would that have been? That's a huge amount.
It's a huge amount, and it's a huge jump from 150 for her first book to 1,000 for her second book, which shows you how popular her first book must have been. And Jane Austen got maybe £30-40 for some of her books, but she didn't get anywhere near as much as Susan Ferrier.
She was a bit bitter, wasn't she? Because she didn't really get much
financial compensation, definitely not. Susan's third book, I believe she got 1,700.
That's a lot of money.
Which is a huge amount of money, but also really shows her worth, because publishing at the end of the day is a business. You're not going to give some money to people just because you like them.
I think I've read Marriage. I haven't read any others of hers because they're quite hard to get hold of, aren't they?
Yeah. Marriage has been republished recently, and it's got an amazing foreword by Val McDermott. Our very own Queen of Crime is a huge Susan Ferrier fan. And it's lovely having those kind of connections actually with modern day writers harking back and loving writers from the past, particularly female writers supporting each other in that way.
When they did the Writers' Museum, they obviously redid this paving and they've put in some quotes, haven't they?
Yes, it's now called the Makar's Court. And there are 43 plaques in total so far, 8 of whom are women, which is quite nice. So it's 19%, which is not bad, more than the statues. And again, it's one of these places where, as a resident, you are rushing through. So Naomi Mitchinson.
This one's wearing out.
You can tell the ones that have been here for the longest from the wear and tear on them.
Who's Naomi Mitchison? I've never heard of her.
She was a novelist, I think.
Oh, I like this one. I know it's a man and we're talking women.
It's okay.
We'll let him in just as a special
I mean,
treat.
he was definitely a man who loved women, let's be honest.
That's true. As did Robbie Burns, who comes up a lot in my podcast.
Yes.
So we've got James Boswell, 1740 to 1795. I rattled down the high street in high elevation of spirits. So he'd been boozing, we think.
Definitely. Which I think was a common occurrence with Boswell. This is, and apologies, I'm going to get this pronunciation wrong because it's Gaelic, but it's Marymore na Oran, or Great Mary of the Song, as she was known.
And she now has a piece of chewing gum on the...
She does, indeed. I mean, how else do you commemorate someone without chewing gum? She was born in Skye in 1821, and she became a nurse. She got married. She moved to Inverness. Her husband died. She had 5 children, and she took a job looking after a dying wife of an English soldier. So Inverness at that time was very much run by English soldiers, and after the wife died, Mary Macpherson, as she was accused of stealing some clothing. She denied it. She denied it all of her life, but she was found guilty and sentenced to 40 days in prison.
Oh.
And she said, and I love this quote, I've written it down because I can never remember it, but she spent the 40 days in the English prison, if you like, the English run prison, and she said, "It was the injustice I suffered that brought my poetry to life." She was 50 years of age, had never done poetry really beforehand, but came out of that prison and was determined to create lots of poetry. Couldn't write, but she created them. Said that she had memorised 80,000 lines of poetry by the time she died, and a lot of her poetry was quite political. This is the 19th century when so much was going on in the Highlands in particular, and even when she moved to Glasgow, she carried on creating poetry all about the injustices that were happening up in the Highlands. She was writing about the land reforms that were causing such heartache and such destruction for the people that she grew up with on Skye, about the Highland clearances. In fact, I've got an amazing photograph of her that I just love because she is clearly so proud of herself. So this is definitely after she has come out of prison, and this is when she is famous now as a poet. And one thing that's not seen in this photograph, but she used to walk around towards the end of her life with a silver mounted walking stick, and the stick was gifted to her by Professor Blackie, who the building just over there is named after, actually, in this court. So there's a nice little link there. He was professor at Edinburgh University, professor of Greek, but also he raised the money to help found the Celtic chair at Edinburgh University. So this plaque was put down 2-3 years ago, so it's just one of the newest ones. And what I like is that she is right next to another favourite of mine, Elizabeth Melville, Lady Curious, and she is believed to be the first woman in Scotland to have something published in 1603.
Oh, we like her then. Let's go and have a look at her.
I don't have a picture of her, unfortunately. I haven't been able to find one at all.
Tyrant's threat, though, lion's rage,
And raw.
and roar. Defy them all and fear not to win out.
Which is quite relevant for today, I feel, as well.
I like her too.
The poem that was published in 1603 was called Ein Godly Dream, which is this quote is from, and it was about how the king, James VI, who was very quickly becoming James I, should really leave religion alone. He should back off and not interfere. And she published this amazing, very long poem about that. And the poem was so popular, it was republished for the next 100 years. So way beyond her lifetime, it was still being republished. It was adopted by the Covenanters in the middle of the 17th century as well.
So we'll put all the links to about the women on the podcast so that people, when they go and listen, can find out more about it, because it's good to go and read them, and I like her.
She's brilliant. And for a very long time, it was believed that we had lost most of her poetry, and then an incredible historian called Dr. Jamie Reed Baxter, he discovered some more of her poems, and they've been published in a very thin volume now, but you can still find more about her, which is fantastic. And I like the fact that she's here because it's reminding us that actually people have written for centuries. Writing is not a new thing. She was quite unusual in that she was published, but she also wrote a lot of manuscripts, and what happened even in Susan Ferrier's time is that you would write manuscripts and they would be shared between friends and family. So the publication itself was not the end goal. Nowadays, if you haven't published, you're not considered a successful writer. But in those days, it was all about writing a manuscript, sharing it with friends and family, or with your wider network. So Elizabeth's manuscripts, her poems would definitely have been shared, and we know they were shared with a lot of people.
We've got John Muir, who we know all about, the other man. I dare to live only to entice people to look at nature's loveliness. He would be good on the podcast.
He would, wouldn't he?
Tell me, John, what does the outdoors mean to you? Unfortunately, he's not around to ask. So we've talked about D.E. Stevenson and Susan Ferrier. Who is your favourite Edinburgh writer?
My favourite Edinburgh writer is not a writer of fiction or poetry. She's non-fiction, but she's someone who absolutely fascinates me. And anyone who knows me who's listening to this is already mouthing the words Mary Somerville. She was actually a scientist. She lived in Edinburgh a couple of times. She was born in 1780. She lived a lot of her childhood in Burnt Island, so across the water, but Edinburgh is where she came for her education, to stay with family during the winter months and to explore the fun that is Edinburgh, going to the theatre and concerts and stuff. Her autobiography talks a lot about her life in Edinburgh for the short period that she was here. She then got married, because that's what good girls do. She went down to London, she had 2 children, and then thankfully her husband died, because he did not believe in education for women. He did not believe that women were worth much, to be honest. She comes back to Edinburgh, but she's now a widow. She has a bit of money, so she's financially slightly independent. She has 2 boys, one of whom is very young, but she has a bit of freedom, which is one of the fascinating things about widows, is they have a freedom that women don't often have in any other point of their life. There was no expectation for her to remarry because she had children, so she's done the thing that women are supposed to do. She does remarry, but she lives for a period in Edinburgh. She is exploring as much mathematics as she can because she loves it. She wins a prize in a magazine at this point as well. She's making use of the fact that her son is getting tutored by learning things through that. And her second husband is much, much, much more supportive. But her cousin, William Somerville, who she married, was such a supportive husband. He, at a time when so many libraries were banned to women, he would go and do research for her. He was the one, because of society, people couldn't approach her, they approached him instead, but he made sure that everything was passed on to her. He read all of her manuscripts. He was also the one in 1826, when a paper was being published in the Royal Society Journal. Because she's a woman, she's not allowed to go into the Royal Society to present it, so he does that for her. He himself is a member of the Royal Society. He's a medical doctor who was in the army for a very long time. And he goes in and he presents it. So when it's published, it's presented by W. Somerville, but it's by Mrs. Somerville.
That's extraordinary, isn't it, when you think about it, that she writes the paper but can't go in herself to present it.
They lived in Edinburgh for a short time, and then he gets a job down at the Chelsea Hospital in London, so they go down to London. But she comes back every now and then. They spend the last third to a half of her life living in Italy. She does that because actually they've got into financial difficulties, and it's cheaper to live in those times. It's cheaper to live in Italy than it is in England. And she becomes the main breadwinner. William Somerville becomes too ill to work. She publishes her first book when she's 50. It's a bit like Great Mary of the Song. Her kind of career really takes off from 50 plus. And she gets a pension by the government in recognition of the work that she does, so that pension and then her publications help the family. But even when they're living in Italy, in 1844 she comes back to visit the UK, and she comes here to Edinburgh, and the History of Science Museum in Oxford have got a microscope of hers that she bought from a shop on Princes Street in 1844. She would have been 63 at the time. She was 91 when she died, so she was very old by any standards really when she died, but she had such a brilliant mind that even like the day that she died, she records that she did 5 hours of mathematical stuff because she loved it.
She's extraordinary. I like
I
that.
I am slightly obsessed with Mary, shall we say. But even things like when she was a child, she gave up sugar in protest against the slave trade. So I'm doing a lot of research at the moment about that, and it's really interesting to think about children getting involved in protests. When you think back just a few years ago, the Greta Thunberg and the schools protests on Fridays, and I think sometimes we forget that kids really care about these things, and they can't always protest because they don't have much control, but when they can, they do, and I think that's more powerful in a way.
She sounds amazing.
She is.
I think my favourite Edinburgh writer, if I'm allowed to say,
of course,
is Muriel Spark. Everyone obsessed about The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie, but it's not her best book.
I think that's the trouble. Sometimes writers get known for books that actually aren't the best that they have produced, and that can sometimes put people off. I don't know if you've seen the book Where Are the Women by Sarah Sheridan. It's a fictitious guide to Scotland where everything is named after women. So St Andrew's Square in Edinburgh is Suffragette Square, because that's where the suffrage had their headquarters. And the Writers' Museum is still here, but it's now looking at Dorothy Dunnett, Dorothy Stevenson, Susan Ferry, and Muriel Spark.
Oh, no, I haven't.
Yeah.
I keep talking about Sarah Sheridan on my podcast. So we're talking about women and the challenges they've faced, and we've talked about the challenges that you've faced in your business. But what do you love about what you're doing?
I'm passionate about the history, and I love telling people about it. And I love the conversations that leads to as well. One of the conversations, for example, has been about sex workers and how they are treated. Because when Mary McKinnon, who I mentioned earlier, was put on trial, the judge said to the jury, all men of course, to ignore anything the women said because they made money from sex essentially, so they couldn't be trusted. That was 1823. And then when you look at, for example, the killer of Emma Crawford, who's only recently been found guilty, a sex worker across in Glasgow, so many of her colleagues were saying, we know who did it, it's him, but the police weren't really taking them seriously. So that still happens to this day. Women's voices are still being dismissed if they fit certain behaviours or certain jobs that society has deemed not acceptable. So you have some really interesting conversations around that, around the work that women have done, about how women are remembered as well. One of the women I talk about is Mary Erskine, who most people in Edinburgh now know of because of a school that she helped to set up back in the 1700s, but that was only in 1944 named after her. Whereas when you think about a lot of the now independent schools in Edinburgh and how they are named after the men, they're quite often named after the men when the men had given the money. So either just after they had died or during their lifetime. So we have conversations about that, about how women aren't necessarily deemed acceptable to commemorate during their lifetime, and it's only several centuries later that someone might rediscover them and start talking about them. And I like to think of my tours, this might sound rather grand, but almost like a pebble thrown into a pond, and the ripples are the people who've come on the tour, and they might find one person really interesting, and then they'll go and tell a friend, and then that's someone else who knows about that one particular woman, and trying to get those messages out that women have always been here, we have always done stuff, we have always been part of society, and maybe we need to rethink about the narrative that we have been told. There's one woman who came on the very first tour I ever did, almost 2 years ago now, and she lives in Linlithgow, Catherine Welsh, and she really enjoyed the tour, but as she was getting the train back to Linlithgow, said, I wonder what the women in Linlithgow are like. And so she set up a research group for people in Linlithgow to look. It's called More Than Mary, because Linlithgow is only ever talked about in terms of Mary Queen of Scots. And they've done an amazing project about the women who worked in the munitions factory there during the First World War, to the point now where they are going to have a little board put up, because there is a board there that tells you about the men, but now they're going to have one put up about the women as well.
That's brilliant. You must be so proud of that.
I'm so proud. And it's those little ripples, and I know of a couple of authors who've come on my tours who've then included some of the women in the books that they're writing as well. And it is that kind of, there is real interest out there, and it's just about getting that information out there. And I do some tours for some primary school kids as well, which I love, 8 and 9-year-olds coming along. One of the things I love about that is I tell them about a particular suffragette, and I say, right, I'm going to talk about the suffrage movement and suffragettes, and they all shout Pankhurst, and that annoys me because although Emmeline Pankhurst did a lot, I don't particularly like her, but also she was down in England. There were amazing women up here who were also fighting for the right to vote. So I go, yes, but let's forget her, let's look at all of the others. Also being 8 and 9, they just say what they think. So when I tell them about women who weren't allowed to become doctors, they go, that's not fair. I'm going, yes, you're right, it's not fair. I tell them about women who've been told no but carry on regardless. And I kind of hope, although it is both boys and girls, I'm really hoping that the girls in particular take the message that don't always take no for an answer. You can find your own path if you want to.
That's really rewarding, seeing kids
the next generation.
People going away and being inspired to go and set up that group. And have you got any plans for the future? Have you got things coming up?
I am creating a new tour which I'm hoping to run throughout the year, which is about the suffrage movement in Edinburgh. Pankhurst will not be she might be mentioned briefly, but not hugely. And again, it's looking at how the different ways women got involved and the different names up here. And Blackford Observatory was bombed by a suffragette in 1913. The damage is still there.
Is it?
Yeah, but most people don't know about it.
Oh.
We don't know who did it. She left behind a bag with, I think it was some currant buns inside and a note to say votes for women or something like that. So we know it's definitely a suffragette. We don't know the significance of the currant buns, whether that was a snack while she was setting the bomb or if it had some hidden meaning. We just don't know. But it's things like that happened in our city. It's things like force feeding a suffragette in England started in 1909, but the first in Scotland wasn't until 1914, so 4 and a bit years afterwards. And it's looking at those differences So I'm doing that, and I'm also looking at creating a tour about the Enlightenment.
So if people want to know more about the writers that we've talked about, we'll put some links on the podcast. But where's a good place for them to start looking as well if they want to do their own research?
Well, there's a brilliant book that's recently been published by the National Museum of Scotland, actually, about Scottish women writers. So it's a fantastic volume full of many women. I'm slightly biased because it has a picture on the front of Mary Somerville, which is what first attracted me to the book. It mentions more than just her, it mentions many others, and it's a nice slim volume that will get you into the way of going, maybe I'll hear about that, maybe I'll go and find out about her.
So obviously you've chosen to you spend time researching and working inside, but you've chosen to do outdoor tours. Is that because the outdoors means something to you?
I love the outdoors. I love how much you can explore in the outdoors. I also love how the outdoors can kind of save you in a way. I'm very lucky to live in Portobello in Edinburgh. 3 minutes walk from my flat, I'm on the beach. And the number of times when, I could have had the worst day ever and just go there, see the waves coming in and out. And it's just that reminder that actually you're a small speck on a big planet in a humongous amount of time, and everything will be all right.
It's nice being near the beach.
I love it.
And has there been a time in your life when the outdoors has helped you?
Yes, I've suffered quite a lot with depression in the past, and although I haven't always been able to force myself to go out, when I have, it definitely helps. That being surrounded by nature, seeing plants still growing, hearing birds tweeting, but even in an urban setting, that ability to discover and to see things, to stop and just look at things in a different way. I love it.
And I ask everybody this because people listen because they want to find new spaces. Where's your favourite space in Edinburgh? Outdoors. I love, obviously, Portobello Beach, although it can get very crowded at times, particularly on the one day when it's sunny and everyone heads out that way. I also love Arthur's Seat and Holyrood Park. Sometimes walk home that way and it's lovely, again, just stopping. But in terms of urban settings, one of my favourite places is actually Tweedy Court, very close to the World's End pub, because no one goes down there. It's really quiet and it's just a lovely place to go and be in nature and be still. Well, that's brilliant. Thank you very much.
You're
I've really, really enjoyed meeting you.
I've enjoyed it as well. It's been brilliant. Thank you so much.
It's been a great chat. We've seen all the tours coming in. There's now a lady dressed as a black angel or something, which we're enjoying. And
this is Edinburgh.
Lots of background noise. But thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was a really interesting, inspiring and fun recording. I loved meeting Ruth. And I think that she would be a great person to go on a tour with. She would really introduce you to bits about the city that you didn't know. I learned so much talking to her. I feel completely inspired. And if you enjoyed listening to that episode, or you enjoyed listening to the podcast generally, please go online and leave a review and rate us too. And obviously tell friends and colleagues about it. And if you know of any outdoor spaces in Edinburgh who would like to be featured, please get in touch.